Karen's secret charging sessions started small, then got bolder. First, I didn't even notice. It was just a feeling, really. Something seemed off. I'd glance at the porch light in the evening and wonder why it was dimmer than usual. Then I started hearing soft humming sounds outside around midnight. Not every night, just occasionally. I live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows what everyone else is doing, especially in an HOA community, but this was different. Subtle. Almost sneaky. One morning, while I was out watering the lawn, I noticed a faint track in the dew-covered grass near the side of my house. It led to the external power outlet that I rarely used. The plastic weather cover was slightly ajar. I remember standing there, hose in hand, staring at it like it might explain itself. The next night, I stayed up a little later. No lights on, no TV, just me at the window. Around 12:47 a.m., I saw her, Karen, in her yoga pants and fluffy robe, walking over from her driveway with a long black extension cord coiled over her shoulder like some kind of suburban outlaw. She moved like she wasn't doing anything wrong, like it was totally normal to plug a Tesla into your neighbor's house while they slept. She had this little flashlight between her teeth, and I could see her mouth twitching like she was humming to herself. She plugged in fast, clearly not her first time, then vanished back to her property like nothing happened. The nerve of it stunned me. I waited a few days to confront her, just to be sure. I wanted proof, so I bought a small security camera and tucked it behind the flower box, angled right at the outlet. 3 nights later, there she was again. Same routine, same flashlight, same smug little expression. I had her on video. I figured that would be enough to scare her off. The next day, I walked over with a printed still from the footage and tried to be civil. I told her I didn't want to escalate things, but she couldn't just use my power without asking. Her response? She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but an actual, unfiltered, condescending laugh. Then she said, and I quote, "Well, your outlet is on my side of the fence, so I thought it was fine." I reminded her that the fence doesn't dictate property lines, and she just rolled her eyes and walked back inside. It was infuriating. But worse, it didn't stop her. In fact, it got worse. The following week, I found the outlet left open and one of my porch lights completely dead. I checked my electricity usage and, sure enough, there was a spike between midnight and 4 a.m. every other day. The HOA, when I reported it, shrugged it off. They said there wasn't enough evidence she was intentionally stealing power, and maybe I should work it out as neighbors. Couldn't believe it. They acted like I was the difficult one, like I was creating drama over a few cents of electricity. But it wasn't just cents, it was principle. She was violating my property, my privacy, and acting like I should be grateful for it. A few nights later, I caught her plugging in again, this time earlier than usual. I stepped out onto my porch and just stood there, staring at her. She didn't even flinch, just waved at me like we were old friends sharing a joke. Then she pointed at her car and said, "Hope you don't mind. It's just for a couple of hours." I was speechless. She didn't ask. She informed me, like I was the guest on her property. That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop unless I made it stop. The polite route, the neighborly chats, the HOA complaints, none of it worked. And she knew it. Karen had found a loophole in our quiet little neighborhood, and she was going to exploit it for all it was worth. By now, she wasn't even trying to hide it. Her car sat close to the dividing fence most nights, the thick charging cord snaking across my garden like it belonged there. I found tire tracks on my side of the lawn once, and I'm convinced she had moved the car even closer to make the cord reach without tension. I started to resent stepping outside at night. That soft buzzing from her charger became the soundtrack to my frustration. And when I finally calculated the estimated cost of the power she was stealing, it was no longer about just annoyance. It was about money, disrespect, and the complete disregard she had for boundaries. OA ignored my complaints, called it a neighborly misunderstanding. That sentence still rings in my head like an insult disguised as diplomacy. After catching Karen red-handed on my security footage, after witnessing her drag her Tesla charging cable across my yard like she owned the place, I thought reporting her to the Homeowners Association would be the obvious next step. That's what HOAs are for, right? To maintain order, protect property lines, enforce rules. I had no idea I was about to enter a bureaucratic maze of passive shrugging and selective blindness. I submitted my first formal complaint on a Wednesday, attached the camera footage, timestamp screenshots, a copy of my rising electricity bill highlighting the late-night usage spikes. I even included a letter explaining how I had already tried to speak to Karen directly. I walked into the HOA office thinking this was a slam dunk. Clear evidence, ongoing issue, multiple offenses. The woman at the front desk, Meredith, nodded politely, took my folder, and promised it would be reviewed promptly. She gave me a smile that looked more like a wince, like she already knew how this would go. A week passed with no reply. Then two. On the third week, I received an email from the HOA board thanking me for bringing the matter to their attention and assuring me it had been noted. That was it. No mention of the evidence, no next steps, no indication they'd even watched the video. I called and asked to speak to someone directly. They connected me to Paul, one of the board members. His voice was drenched in that faux-friendly tone people use when they want to get you off the phone. "Well," he said, dragging out the word like it was stuck to his teeth. "From what I understand, it seems to be more of a neighborly misunderstanding than an actual violation. You know how things can get taken out of context." I almost dropped the phone. Taken out of context? What context justifies plugging your luxury car into someone else's house every night for free? I tried to push back, to explain that I had video proof, but Paul just sighed and told me the board had more urgent matters, and that they preferred neighbors settle minor disputes privately. Minor, that's what he called it. Apparently, trespassing and electricity theft didn't qualify as anything more serious than an oops. That was when I started to see the cracks in the system. The HOA wasn't interested in justice. They were interested in convenience, keeping everything calm on the surface, avoiding drama, pretending nothing was wrong as long as nobody was making too much noise. And Karen? She knew that. I'm convinced she had done something like this before. Her confidence, her total lack of shame. She acted like someone who had tested the HOA before and walked away untouched. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA, but not the kind I expected. It was a warning for me. Apparently, someone, take a wild guess, had complained that I was monitoring neighbors with surveillance equipment, and that it made them feel uncomfortable and unsafe. That's right. I was the one being warned. Not the power thief, not the repeat offender trespassing on my land at night, but me, for having a camera pointed at my own outlet. Felt like I had entered some kind of HOA twilight zone. I went to the next board meeting to speak in person. I printed photos, played the video on a tablet, even brought a printed breakdown of the kilowatt hours stolen. They sat there, stone-faced, occasionally nodding, then returned to discussing lawn maintenance schedules and holiday decor regulations like I had just asked for an extra garbage bin. At one point, I asked point blank, "So what does someone have to do around here to get the rules enforced?" One of the board members, Judy, I think, gave me a smile that could curdle milk and said, "We just try to keep the peace, not stir the pot." Stir the pot? Karen was helping herself to my electrical supply like it was a buffet, and I was the one being told not to make a fuss. After that meeting, I realized the HOA wasn't going to help. They had chosen neutrality, which, in this case, meant siding with the louder, more manipulative neighbor. Karen had played her cards well. Kept it quiet, kept it casual, kept it just low-key enough that the board could pretend it wasn't their problem. My electric bill spiked. Proof she was tapping in. I don't usually pore over my utility statements. Like most people, I glance at the total, grimace a little, and move on with my life. But that month, something felt wrong. The number was almost double what it had been the previous month, and I hadn't changed a thing in my routine. No extra appliances, no guests, no air conditioning binges. It didn't make sense. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe the power company made a mistake. Maybe the rates had gone up and I missed the memo. But when the second inflated bill came in, I knew it wasn't a fluke. That's when I sat down with a cup of coffee and really went through the numbers. I logged into my utility dashboard online and pulled up the daily usage chart. The pattern jumped out immediately. Massive spikes every other night, usually between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. right around the time I had seen Karen skulking around my outlet with her extension cord. The rest of the day's consumption looked totally normal, just the usual baseline for someone who works from home and runs a modest household. But those late-night hours? Off the charts. I downloaded the usage logs and compared them to the timestamps on my security footage. It was an almost perfect match. Every time her Tesla appeared in the footage, parked conveniently close to the property line, the power draw skyrocketed. I highlighted the overlaps in a spreadsheet, just to see it laid out plainly. It was undeniable. She was using my electricity to charge her car several times a week, and it was hitting me directly in the wallet. To confirm my suspicions, I conducted a little test. One night, I switched off every breaker in my house except the one powering the outdoor outlet. Then I waited. Sure enough, around midnight, the meter on that breaker started to climb. I even plugged in a smart energy monitor just to get precise numbers. In just under 4 hours, that one outlet pumped out enough electricity to charge a car about 20%. Roughly $4 to $5 worth of power in a single night. Multiply that by 3 or 4 sessions a week, and it was clear. She was stealing over $60 of electricity from me every month. It wasn't just about the money, though the rising bill was infuriating. It was the principle. I was being forced to bankroll someone else's luxury car without consent, without acknowledgement, without a single ounce of decency from her side. She acted like the outlet existed for her convenience, like I was the fool for caring. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. I don't live in a mansion. I'm not running a data center. Every dollar counts, and here I was working to pay for her nightly joyrides. I contacted the utility company next, hoping they could offer some help. Maybe there was a way to block external usage, or set alerts for unusual patterns. The technician I spoke to was sympathetic, but said their hands were tied. The meter couldn't distinguish between who was using the power, it just measured the total load. I explained the situation, told them about the footage, the charging patterns, the outrageous spikes in usage. They admitted I had a strong case but told me I'd need to pursue it legally if I wanted restitution. A civil claim for theft of services, they said. That's when it really sank in. Nobody was going to fix this for me. The HOA wouldn't step in. The utility company couldn't intervene. The police probably wouldn't waste time on a neighborly power struggle. It was all on me. Every time I saw the bill in my mailbox, my blood pressure ticked up a little higher. It became a symbol of everything Karen was getting away with. She wasn't just freeloading. She was eroding my patience, my trust, my peace of mind. I started dreading those quiet nighttime hours, not because I feared her, but because I knew I'd be watching my own property being used like a public charging station. I tried adding locks, covering the outlet, even posting signs. She either ignored them or removed them altogether. My attempts to protect my own resources were met with indifference or quiet sabotage. The numbers didn't lie. Each week, the data told the same story. My outlet, my power, her gain. And no matter how much proof I gathered, it all led to the same reality. Karen was charging her Tesla on my dime, and there was no one in charge willing to stop her. I installed a smart circuit breaker disguised as a regular plug. At that point, it was clear that no one was going to save me. Not the HOA, not the utility company, not even a neighborly confrontation. Karen had turned my outdoor outlet into her personal power station, and every polite attempt to stop her had either been ignored or mocked. The only path left was to fight back creatively, and if the system wouldn't enforce boundaries, I would make my own. I wasn't looking to hurt anyone, just to make it impossible for her to keep taking what wasn't hers. That's when I started researching ways to control and monitor power flow without drawing attention. I spent a few nights on forums, DIY electrical threads, homeowner discussion groups, even Reddit. That's where I found out about smart circuit breakers, especially the kind designed for off-grid solar setups or energy monitoring. They could be installed inline with existing outlets and allow remote control via app. Some of them had surge protection features, automatic cutoff settings, and power consumption logs. It wasn't just a switch, it was a whole control system disguised as an ordinary outlet. The idea sparked something in me. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd make the board unpredictable. I ordered the smart circuit unit online and spent a couple of days customizing it. I installed it behind a fake weatherproof outlet cover that looked exactly like the original one she had been using. From the outside, it looked untouched. No blinking lights, no fancy switches, no signs that anything had changed. But inside, it was wired to a breaker that I could trip at any time, monitor via my phone, and even set to automatically overload under specific conditions. Nothing dangerous, of course, just enough resistance to cause a charging interruption or trigger a disconnect in her car's system. My plan wasn't about revenge. It was about making the outlet unreliable, inconsistent, frustrating. The first night it was active, I stayed up to watch. As expected, she came over around midnight, extension cord in hand, moving with the same smug, self-assured rhythm she always had. She plugged in like it was her own private socket and disappeared back across the fence. I waited about 15 minutes, just long enough for the charge to begin, then tapped the breaker switch in the app. The circuit popped off with a soft click from inside the wall. I couldn't see her face, but I imagined the sudden halt of current must have surprised her. I waited a while, then reconnected the circuit. 5 minutes later, I shut it off again, and then again. Each time, just when the charge would stabilize, I'd break the flow. I watched the camera feed and saw her come out twice, checking the cord, fiddling with the connection. She looked confused, frustrated. She even unplugged and plugged it back in a few times like it might fix itself. Didn't. From her point of view, the outlet had suddenly become flaky, unreliable, barely functional. Just as I had planned. Over the next few nights, I repeated the tactic. Some nights I'd let the charge flow for an hour, then cut it off. Other nights I wouldn't activate it at all. I wanted the inconsistency to get under her skin, to make her second-guess whether it was even worth trying. After about a week of this sabotage cycle, I upgraded the system even further. I added a delay relay and programmed it to simulate a power surge under specific load conditions. Not enough to harm anything, but enough to trigger a safety fault in the Tesla's charger, causing it to throw an error that would take time to reset. It was subtle, safe, and incredibly satisfying. Karen had no idea what was going on, and that was the best part. She couldn't march over and complain because technically, nothing looked wrong. I hadn't blocked the outlet. I hadn't put up a fence. It was still there, still accessible, but completely unreliable in a way that couldn't be predicted or fixed. I kept monitoring the data, watching the load graphs and usage logs through the app. Each week, her charging attempts got fewer. Eventually, the nighttime spikes on my utility dashboard started to flatten. She was giving up. Maybe she thought my outlet had gone bad. Maybe she suspected something but didn't want to risk confrontation again. Either way, my little device had become the silent enforcer that the HOA refused to be. Every time she plugged in, she was gambling with her time, her car, and her patience. And more, it wasn't worth it. One night, I heard a pop and saw sparks. Karen's Tesla wasn't happy. It was a humid Thursday just past midnight when it happened. One of those thick, restless nights where the air clings to your skin and the silence feels heavier than usual. I was sitting in my home office, pretending to work but really just waiting. By now, I had memorized her routine. The sound of her driveway gate clicking open, the soft rubber wheels of her Tesla rolling closer to the fence, the hush-hush patter of her slippers as she crossed the lawn she never had permission to walk on. I didn't even need to check the cameras anymore. I just knew when she was there. This night, though, something felt different. The whole situation had been dragging out for weeks. Her persistence, my sabotage, the silent back and forth war neither of us acknowledged out loud. She hadn't been as consistent lately, but every few nights she'd test her luck, hoping the outlet would behave. She hadn't figured out the trick, hadn't traced the smart circuit, hadn't dared to actually ask me anything. I imagined she still thought she was winning, still believed she was outsmarting me. That illusion was about to shatter. As soon as she plugged in, I got the notification on my phone. The app logged the current draw from the modified outlet and started tracking the flow. I waited like I always did, watching the numbers rise, watching her siphon off the current like a parasite. But this time, I noticed something odd. The amperage wasn't steady. It was spiking, dipping, stuttering in a way it hadn't before. I refreshed the data feed, thinking maybe the app was lagging or the monitor was acting up. But then the outside light flickered. Just once. Faint blink. And then nothing. No more current. Total flatline. A second later I heard it. A sharp, brittle pop, followed by a brief crackle like firecrackers underwater. I rushed to the window. From where I stood, I saw a flicker of orange-blue light just beyond the shrubs, exactly where the extension cord met the outlet. There were sparks, small ones, flashing in a chaotic little burst. Then silence. A few seconds later, I saw Karen step out of her car, holding her phone in one hand and the charging connector in the other. Even from a distance, her frustration was obvious. She stood there, staring at the setup like it had betrayed her. She looked at the outlet, at the cord, back at the Tesla, then at her phone screen again. Whatever it was showing her, it wasn't good news. I slipped on my shoes and walked quietly onto the porch, just to observe. She didn't see me right away. She was bent over near the outlet, inspecting the cord. I could smell the faint whiff of melted plastic, that unmistakable scent of something shorting out. It wasn't a fire hazard. I designed the breaker to cut off immediately after any irregular surge, but it was enough to trigger a warning in the Tesla system. Something about unsafe charging conditions or voltage irregularity, depending on the model. She was panicking a little now, trying to reset the cable, jiggling the connector like it might magically fix itself. Then she saw me. Her head snapped up, and for a second her face changed. Not guilt, not embarrassment, just pure surprise. Like she didn't think I'd dare show up. I didn't say a word, just leaned on the railing and looked at her, calm as ever. She froze for a moment, then slowly stood up and gathered her things. She didn't yell, didn't apologize, didn't make excuses. She just unplugged, coiled the cord over her shoulder like it weighed 100 pounds, and walked back across the lawn into the shadows. No eye contact, no smug little smile like before. I stayed out there a while after she left, checking the outlet and confirming that the safety system had worked exactly as designed. The outer casing had taken the brunt of the heat, but the internal switch had flipped off at the perfect moment. No real damage, just enough to kill the current and fry her attempt. It was the first time I felt a strange kind of peace about the whole thing. Not because it was over, but because I knew I had finally drawn a line she couldn't cross without consequences. The next morning, I checked the Tesla forums to see if anyone else had experienced similar charging errors and what kind of notifications the car would give. Turns out, when the system detects inconsistent voltage or unsafe power supply, it disables charging entirely until a manual reset is performed. Some users reported needing dealership visits to clear persistent errors. I couldn't help but wonder if Karen's smug nightly visits had finally cost her more than just a bit of effort. Maybe it cost her a trip, a repair, or at least a whole lot of frustration. Choe finally noticed, and Karen stopped stealing for good. It was almost comical how long it took them to react, considering I had practically shoved the evidence into their hands more than once. But somehow it took a minor electrical incident, visible sparks and a shaken Tesla owner, for them to finally perk up. Of course, it wasn't concern for me or my rising electric bills that caught their attention. It was the optics. A neighbor's car sparking in the middle of the night? That was the kind of thing that could make the board look bad. Like they weren't doing their job. Like our cozy little community was teetering on the edge of suburban chaos. The morning after the incident, I got a call from Meredith at the HOA office. She sounded different this time. Not dismissive or overly cheerful, but careful, like someone who knew they'd been caught napping on the job. She asked if I had a moment to come in and clarify a few things. I almost laughed. Clarify? After 2 months of emails, videos, screenshots, and energy reports. Still, I agreed, mostly because I knew I finally had the upper hand. I walked into that meeting with a printed timeline, copies of every complaint I'd submitted, and photos of the outlet after the incident. The minute I laid everything on the table, I could see it land. They couldn't ignore it anymore. It was too detailed, too well documented, too real to wave off as a misunderstanding. Paul from the board looked especially uncomfortable. He kept adjusting his glasses, flipping through the papers like he expected to find some loophole that would let them off the hook. But there wasn't one. I didn't raise my voice, didn't demand compensation, didn't ask them to punish Karen. I just laid out the truth. She had been stealing electricity. I had tried to stop it the right way, and when no one helped, I took steps to protect my property. I even explained how the circuit breaker worked, how it was designed to cut power safely, how the sparks were a controlled failure to stop the unauthorized usage. I could tell they didn't understand half the technical parts, but they nodded anyway, trying to save face. What really seemed to land, though, was the realization that this situation had gone public. Neighbors had seen the sparks. People had started whispering. Someone posted about it anonymously on the neighborhood Facebook group. Tesla Karen blows a fuse, or something to that effect. It got enough traction that people began speculating about what really happened, and suddenly, the HOA was no longer dealing with a private complaint. They were dealing with a reputation problem. That's what got them moving. Within a few days, I received a letter, official this time. The tone was much more formal than before. It acknowledged the incident, confirmed receipt of all my previous complaints, and stated that the board had conducted a review of community standards regarding shared electrical access. It didn't mention Karen by name, but it didn't need to. The letter made it clear that going forward, all outdoor outlets must be secured and not used for non-residential vehicle charging purposes by unauthorized individuals. It was vague enough to avoid legal exposure but specific enough to send a message. Karen, for her part, must have received her own communication from the board. She never approached me, never offered a word of apology, but her behavior changed instantly. The Tesla never came near my fence again. She stopped her midnight strolls, stopped dragging that long black extension cord across the lawn like a thief in the night. In fact, for weeks I barely saw her at all. It was like she had gone into hiding, retreating behind her curtains and her silence, hoping the whole neighborhood would forget. But people didn't forget. They noticed the shift. The neighbor across the street even joked, "Looks like Karen found a new power source," with a smirk that said everything without saying much. For me, the quiet was its own kind of victory. No more late-night alerts on my phone. No more spikes on my energy bill. No more anxiety every time I glanced at the side yard. I had my space back, my peace back. And while the HOA never apologized outright for dragging their feet, their sudden flurry of activity and policy changes was the closest thing I was going to get. In a way, it was better than an apology. It was acknowledgement, a silent admission that I had been right all along. And Karen? She never tried anything again. Not with the outlet, not with the HOA, not with me. Whether it was the blown circuit, the board's sudden interest, or just the slow collapse of her invincibility, something changed in her. She had finally hit the wall she thought didn't exist. Maybe it wasn't loud or dramatic or public, but it was enough. Enough for her to stop. Enough for the neighborhood to understand. Enough for me to finally breathe again.